discuss the construction and working of disc brakes. We know that on the basis of construction, brakes can be classified into two types. Drum brakes. These brakes involve a brake drum whose rotation is prevented by internal expanding brake linings. Disc brakes. These brakes involve a brake disc whose rotation is prevented by disc pads. Now let us discuss disc brakes in brief. A typical disc brake can be shown as: it consists of a cast iron disc bolted to the wheel hub and a stationary housing called caliper. The caliper is connected to some stationary part of the axle, such as stub axle or the axle casing. It consists of two cylindrical parts, each containing a piston. On the outer surface of both pistons, there is a friction pad held by retaining pins. Passages are drilled in the caliper to allow the flow of brake fluid into the cylinder. Each cylinder contains a rubber sealing ring provided between the cylinder and the piston. Now let's understand its working. When the brake pedal is pressed, the brake fluid at high pressure enters the cylinders and fills up, thus pushing the piston towards the rotating disc. This causes the friction pads to get pressed against the disc and apply equal and opposite force on it, thus making it stop. When the brakes are released, the brake fluid leaves the cylinder, and the rubber sealing rings act as return springs and retract the pistons and friction pads away from the disc. Now, according to their working, disc brakes can be of three types: fixed caliper disc brake, sliding caliper disc brake, and swinging caliper disc brake. Let us discuss each one by one. Fixed caliper disc brake. A typical fixed caliper disc brake can be shown as: here the caliper is fixed to the axle casing, and two cylinder housings are provided with pistons. When the brake is applied, the brake fluid enters both the cylinders and thus pushes the piston and the friction pads onto the rotating disc. Sliding caliper disc brake. A typical sliding caliper disc brake can be shown as: here the caliper is mounted on the axle casing but isn't fixed to it. It is allowed to slide on the axle casing. Also, the caliper is provided with one cylinder having pistons at its both ends. On the other side, friction pad is fixed directly onto the caliper. Now when the brake is applied, the brake fluid enters the cylinder and pushes both pistons outwards. The piston with the friction pad attached on it directly presses against the disc, whereas the piston without the friction pads causes the caliper to slide onto the axle casing and thus get pressed against the rotating disc. Swinging caliper disc brake. A typical swinging caliper disc brake can be shown as: here the caliper is hinged about a fulcrum pin, and one of the friction pads is fixed to the caliper. Now when the brake is applied, the brake fluid enters the cylinder and pushes the piston outwards. This causes the piston-attached friction pad to get pressed against the rotating disc. Also, the reaction on the caliper due to pushing the piston outwards causes the caliper to swing about the pin in such a way that the fixed friction pad moves inwards and gets pressed against the rotating disc. Thus, equal pressure from both sides is applied onto the rotating disc. Now let us summarize the disc brakes as: